Hello, and welcome to this session in which we're going to concentrate on learning about Jesus. And this is my message in a few words. Jesus enjoys us helping him to fulfill his missions. In other words, generally, he prefers it when we partner with him to achieve his objectives rather than to achieve them on his own, even though we might slow him down. Even though he's the sustainer of the universe and could do everything easily and perfectly on his own, the fact is he enjoys our cooperation. Remarkable. But is it true that he enjoys us being co-workers with him? Well, we need some biblical evidence to support this, because otherwise it's a forlorn dream. So let's see if Matthew can help us with some stories he records in his gospel. Here's story number 1. It's only recorded by Matthew in chapter 17, and it's a little strange. There were just the two of them sitting by the lake. The sun was shining, the water was cool to the touch, and they were together, the leader and the follower, the way it had been for a little while. Oh, he didn't mind being the follower. Not that he was a brilliant follower, but he was learning and getting better. And the leader, well, he was just special. And then it happened. It was too good to last. Some bossy busybodies pushed into their space and demanded money. Quite a lot of money, actually, about 2 days' wages that they said belonged to them. Well, they were tax collectors, and the money was to pay the temple tax that all Jewish males over 20 were supposed to pay once a year. By the way, the leader was Jesus and the follower was Peter. Well, now, there could have been a bit of a problem because there's no evidence that either of them had sufficient money and the temple tax needed to be paid. Now, interestingly, at the time, not everybody thought that the temple tax was legitimate, especially the ordinary people who were almost all extremely poor. What was Jesus going to do? The Pharisees were antagonistic towards the Jerusalem temple because they said it was corrupt, and it was. And they encouraged people not to pay the tax to an institution that was not fit for purpose. It was an embarrassment to God, they said. Now, the Sadducees, the other major religious party in Israel, well, they were fans of the temple and they dominated its administration. They were rich aristocrats living just south of the temple in the smart quarter of the city. And they backed the temple tax. But even they were getting embarrassed about it because the temple had a lot of financial reserves. In fact, a few years later, they didn't know what to do with the taxes that they'd collected. Now, on previous occasions, Jesus had upset people by making his own decisions, often against the prevailing beliefs of the people. He forgave sins without people first saying sorry. He decided if and when it was appropriate to fast. He ate with the worst of people. He broke Sabbath laws by healing on the Sabbath. He touched the unclean, lepers. I could go on. But here, even though many would have agreed with him if he had refused to pay, on this occasion, he follows the rules and decides to pay the tax, even though his father owned the temple. I wonder why. Well, Jesus does something very interesting. He tells Peter to go fishing, and Peter was good at fishing. He could catch fish, and I guess he thought that Jesus wanted him to catch a fish, sell it, make some money, and pay the tax. To pay the tax, Jesus asks Peter to help him. Does he need this? Surely Jesus could have as easily created a coin out of nothing and flicked it to the tax collectors. A few verses earlier, Matthew records Jesus casting out a demon who had interrupted his sermon. And a few verses before that, Jesus is transfigured on the mountain and his godness is revealed in a bright white light. Jesus doesn't need Peter to help him. He's God. But Jesus is more interested in his young follower than Peter can imagine. Jesus wants Peter to know something remarkable, that Jesus, wants him, Peter, to help him achieve his miracle, to participate in his miracle. And to do that, he asks Peter to do something that he knows he can do. Go catch a fish. And it's at this point that the miracle occurs, because when Peter lands the fish and opens its mouth, there's a shekel in its mouth. Now, here's my question. Who did the miracle? Well, Jesus knew that the first fish would have the shekel in its mouth, but it was Peter who caught it. The fish wasn't waiting on the beach for him. It didn't jump out of the water onto Peter's lap. No, Peter used his fishing ability. He got a fishing line. He baited the hook. He dropped it in the water. He watched for the tug on the line, and he caught the fish. Peter caught the fish. They achieved the miracle together. Call him a junior partner if you like, but together they achieved Jesus' mission to pay the tax collectors. It seems to me that Jesus wanted Peter to know that if he obeyed him, they would share his mission together. By the way, do you notice how much the temple tax was? Half a shekel. And there was a shekel in the fish. Jesus says, give it to them for me and for you. Jesus provided enough for himself and Peter. He's remarkable. Well, what's that got to do with us? Well, here's the point. Jesus has given us gifts and talents and abilities for a purpose. It's so that we, with him, can achieve what he wants to do in our communities. He could achieve his objectives all on his own, but he prefers to give us the pleasure and the privilege of participating with him in achieving his plans. Now, Jesus has already let his disciples know that he wants them to partner him in his mission a few times, as if to make the point, because it sounds too good to be true. And so Jesus affirms it time and time again. Let me mention two earlier incidents in Matthew where Matthew combines them to emphasize this lesson. Here's the second story. Jesus has been healing all day. Nobody's helped him. He's done everything on his own. He's Jesus. He can easily complete the mission because he's God. There's at least 5,000 men there, plus women, plus children, perhaps 15,000 people, and they're hungry. They're not starving. They could go to the nearby villages. In fact, the disciples suggest that Jesus sends them there for food. But listen to what Jesus says. You feed them. You feed them. Now that sounds like a knee-jerk reaction of Jesus. Why does he ask them to do that, especially when he knows they can't? And if they can't, and he knows they can't, why tell them to do it? Well, maybe Jesus is hoping that one of them is going to remember other occasions when they were commissioned by Jesus to fulfill tasks that were beyond them, like healing people or casting out demons. Those commissions were beyond them, but because Jesus asked them to do it, they soon found out that if they obeyed, he would provide the resources to enable them to do them. But this time they missed the opportunity. And instead, they respond with, we've got 5 loaves and we've got 2 fish. That's not a bad plan. But of course, Jesus has a better plan. And Jesus says, in effect, let me show you something about me and something about you and me together. Jesus orders the crowd to sit down, and he takes the bread and the fish, and he looks up to heaven, and he blesses the food, and he breaks the bread. Jesus does the miracle. Or does he? You see, Matthew and Mark and Luke say that Jesus gave the food to the disciples, and the disciples gave it to the people. They partnered Jesus in the miracle. But note this, there's no reference that the disciples came back to Jesus for more food. The implication is the miracle kept happening on the basis of their obedience to his command to give the bread to the people. Now, what's Jesus revealing about himself? Well, he can multiply bread, just like Elisha did when he fed 100 men with just 20 barley loaves with some left over. Indicates that Jesus must be a prophet also. But much more importantly, in the desert, God provided bread, manna, to the children of Israel on their way to their promised land. Matthew, are you trying to tell me that Jesus is God? And the answer, of course, is yes. And the lesson for the disciples, and for you and for me, is also this: Jesus, who's God, enjoys it when we partner with him in achieving what's impossible for us, using resources provided by him when it's beyond us. You see, Jesus could have fed those people on his own and quickly. He could have said, in 5 seconds, you'll all feel full. Or he could have arranged for food to be miraculously deposited in their laps. But instead, he slows the process down so that his followers get the message that he wants them to help him, the creator of the universe, to achieve his objective that he could do so easily on his own. Remarkable. It's very interesting that Matthew doesn't record any response by the crowd, no awareness of a miracle having occurred. Neither does Jesus offer any teaching concerning this miracle. This would have been the opportunity for him to reveal himself as the bread of life, but he doesn't. He doesn't even tell them the miracle has taken place, because the miracle is specifically for his young followers, and dare I suggest, for you and for me. Jesus, who's God, says, listen, when I ask you to work with me, because together we will fulfill my agenda. Now, straight after this story, Matthew records another story of Jesus walking on water. But he adds something unique, because Peter walks on water too. Why do you tell me that, Matthew? Well, think about it. Who else has walked on the water in the Bible? Nobody, except God. Job says God tramples on the waves. And Psalm 77 speaks of God's unseen footprints on the sea. Walking on water is something that God does. It demonstrates his control over the seas. And that's why Matthew identifies Jesus referring to himself as I am, God's name, when he introduces himself to the disciples who were in the boat. He's not just their savior, he's their God. No wonder that the story ends with the disciples worshipping Jesus. But here's the other lesson for the followers of Jesus. And Peter is learning it. Let me read what Peter says. Lord, since it's you, ask me to come to you on the water. Now, some of your translations will read Peter saying, if it's you, but Peter knew that it was Jesus. He'd already introduced himself to the disciples and told them not to be frightened. Peter knew it was Jesus, and that's why he says, Lord, since it's you. It's an accurate translation of the Greek. Since it's you, ask me to walk on the water. He wasn't being cheeky or precocious. He was learning the previous lesson that Jesus enjoys it when we partner him in doing what he can do. Jesus says, come, come. Come and do what I am doing because I am God. And he gets out of the boat. He was at this very early stage sensing that Jesus would be pleased if he joined him in doing what he was doing. When Jesus, who's God, commissioned Peter to join him in a divine activity, he obeyed. And Jesus did the rest. Remarkable. And the lesson for us? Jesus is God. He doesn't need us to help him fulfill his mission. He's perfectly capable of doing it on his own. But as God, he's delighted when we realize that he wants us to partner him. Peter, go catch a fish. I can do that. And a miracle occurs. Peter, feed these people. Walk on water. Oh, I can't do that. But since you're asking me to do it, I believe that you'll provide the resources. So I will. And a miracle occurs. That's our calling, our privilege, our honor to partner with Jesus to fulfill his plans in our missions. And our response is to be ready for those times when he asks us to partner with him to achieve his objectives. Lord Jesus, you can do everything easily. Thank you for this wonderful truth that you sometimes choose to achieve your ambitions with us by your side. May we remember this and listen when he asks us to partner with him this week to achieve our ambitions and his ambitions. Goodbye.